Hello everybody, this is our first lecture of the course, and this is going to be kind of on the preface information of your textbook. I wanted to talk a bit more about the organizational sense that has been alluded to in your syllabus and in your introduction to the course lecture. So we're going to begin by talking about the organizational sense, and this this lecture is going to be pretty short. I just wanted to give a more example of what this means, and felt like there was some important information in the preface that we should discuss as a class before we continue on. And I included the preface and the introduction kind of to strengthen your beginnings before you start with chapter 1 and so on, because the first couple chapters are going to be a little bit more difficult than the rest of the chapters. So it's good to have a good building block before we begin further in the course and learning more detail. So we're going to talk about this idea of a organizational sense to begin with. So I'm going to go over a couple caveats first. So one of the hardest things in this course that might be challenging is having to think about the criminal justice system at an organizational level. So a lot of your course curriculum has been focused on just the individual. So, for example, in your crim theory classes, if you took a criminological theory class, which you probably have by now, the theories focus a lot on the offender and why they turned to crime. Sometimes other classes focus on the people who arrest, prosecute, defend, detain, or rehabilitate those who have already been committed of a crime or convicted of a crime. So it's focused on the individual level, not at the organizational level. Those are all examples of the individual level. So instead of thinking at the individual level, I want to challenge each and every one of you to consider the criminal justice system organizationally instead of at the individual level. It may be difficult, but it's really not much different than how you already may perceive it. So, for example, we already consider police and attorneys as individuals, but we know that they represent a larger organization. So they operate at a larger organization, and they don't represent themselves, they represent that organization. So, and then a further example would be if you took an example with prosecutors, they are representing the government at the state or federal level, not themselves. So they are employed to represent the government, not themselves or individually. So I wanted to start with that caveat to go over a little bit before we continued on. So thinking organizationally. Thinking organizationally requires you to think about the relationships within a particular criminal justice organization, as well as the relationships between multiple criminal organizations. So these factors could include decision-making, strategies for regulating costs, and contracting out functions of the organization. So there's a lot of different ideas, different parts that go into thinking organizationally. So you think about your making decisions about how the company's going to run, all of these little things that are not individual but more administrative. So you can think of thinking organizationally as a lens. Instead of focusing on just the individual, you focus on the administration aspect of things. And it'll get easier as it goes, but it should make sense that you should think about administratively versus at the individual level. All right, so next, why should we study administration organizationally? So research suggests that leaders in CJ are being required to think at the organizational level. They're required to look at things at the administrative level and how they interact at the administrative level. So it's important to go ahead and get this down now versus when you're in the field and you're maybe tasked to help run and administrate an organization that deals with criminal justice. You'd have to use your organizational lens to be able to do that. So it's why you should. Further, when you represent an organization, more often you're required to put the organization's interest at the forefront versus your own. So while you may not agree with what your organization is doing, you have to put the organization's interests ahead of somebody else. So that's kind of like that example. So I'm going to give you an example of this as well. So, for example, think about if you were an attorney for the defense. You're a defense attorney for a person who committed murder. You're required to defend him in court, which represents the organization's interests. So you're required to defend him. But you really think that the guy definitely killed somebody and should stay in jail. So if you have to think organizationally, your focus is to defend the defendant so they receive their due process, even though you think they should be in jail, or they are completely guilty of their crime and should sit in jail. So you have to take it from the organization standpoint is it's your job to defend them and make sure they get their due process and constitutional rights, even though that they are guilty of a heinous crime and should be locked in jail. So that's an example of studying at the administrative level. So continuing on, you have to focus on what the individuals are representing. So while you can look at the individuals, you still have to look further. So examples of this another example could be if you were employed in Leon County as a district attorney, who are you representing? You're representing yourself, or if you're thinking about it individually, you'd be representing yourself. But if you're thinking about it organizationally, you'd be representing the government of Leon County. And that's the point I'm trying to make here, is to look at it administratively or organizationally, is that you're representing the government, in this case, of Leon County, if you were a district attorney in Leon County. So it's a way to think about it. So the last thing I'm going to mention is C. Wright Mills. And y'all have probably heard from him if you ever took any sociology classes. Sometimes he pops up in your crim theory. But mainly he's known for sociological theory. So he wrote about this concept of a sociological imagination. And he noted that in order to fully understand what is going on around us in society, we should understand that our own biography and understand our historical phase in society in which we are living. So we have to understand organizations that make up the entire CJ system, as well as those that the CJ system interacts with, in order to understand the entire world. So you can't just focus on this one little CJ organization in Nowhereville, Alabama. You should think about the entire system, how that maybe that particular criminal justice organization operates and interacts with every other organization in the rest of the country. Ultimately, using an organizational sense or lens will allow you to view the social world as they operate in greater than the sum of the individuals that they interact with. So it's kind of just a general overview of your organizational lens. Now, we covered a good bit, a couple slides, just to go over your organizational sense, but I thought it was important to mention what the organizational sense is and give you some examples of what is meant by it. I hope these examples were kind of helpful. If you have any others, feel free to drop them in my inbox of other examples. I would love to see what y'all come up with for using your organizational lens, and feel free to share them in the discussion post as well. If you have ideas to make it easier to understand for others, it might be helpful. Alright, so the next lecture would be over the introduction chapter of the text. And again, like I said earlier, I provide these lectures for these two chapters, or these two pieces of a chapter, because they covered some important information that may make the rest of it easier to understand as you go along. They set up a good building blocks to further the information you're going to get for the rest of the course. So I thought it was important to include them. So without further ado, I'll let y'all continue on, and I'll talk to y'all soon, and enjoy the rest of your day.